Draco and Hermione. If you've ever opened a single Harry Potter fanfic in your life, you've seen these two. The fandom wrote more Dramini content than Rowling wrote actual books. So let's stop treating it as a joke and actually ask, what happens to the entire story if these two get together? Everything changes around book 6. Draco gets the task to kill Dumbledore, and he's already falling apart under the pressure. Now, imagine he's secretly with Hermione, a Muggleborn. He can't go through with it. He flips sides early, goes straight to Dumbledore, and suddenly the Order has a spy inside Malfoy Manor, feeding them Death Eater movements, plans, and schedules. Basically a teenage Snape, except people actually like him. Here's the real gossip. The Malfoy Manor scene in Deathly Hallows becomes a completely different nightmare. In canon, Bellatrix tortures Hermione on the drawing room floor while Draco stands there, pretending he can't identify Harry. If Draco loves Hermione, that scene either ends with him blowing his cover to save her, or it never happens at all because Draco already warned the trio to stay away from Snatchers. Either way, the Golden Trio now has a fourth member who knows every secret passage the Death Eaters use inside Hogwarts, and the final battle gets a lot shorter. Voldemort and Bellatrix. Let's be honest, Bellatrix was already Voldemort's wife and everything but paperwork. She talked about him like a god, fought harder for him than anyone with an actual last name in the Death Eaters, and the way she looked at him made Rodolphus Lestrange, her actual husband, the most invisible man in Wizarding Britain. So what if Voldemort loved her back, and they had a daughter? Let's call her Serpens, because the Blacks named their kids after stars, and yes, we're ignoring Delphine from the Cursed Child, because so does most of the fandom. Serpens is born around the first year, half-blood daughter of the man who built his whole movement on blood purity, which is already the kind of hypocrisy that writes itself. Voldemort falls in 1981, Bellatrix goes to Azkaban, and baby Serpens gets passed to the Malfoys like a very dangerous Christmas present. She grows up with Draco, goes to Hogwarts, gets sorted into Slytherin, and nobody knows her dad is the most wanted wizard alive. Then Voldemort comes back. Bellatrix breaks out, and Dumbledore, who figures out everything, learns that the man with no weaknesses has a 15-year-old daughter sitting in the Slytherin common room. The Order doesn't need to hunt 7 Horcruxes anymore. They need one girl. Voldemort starts pulling Death Eaters off missions to guard Serpens. Bellatrix loses her mind trying to protect both her master and her child, and the war machine that terrorized Britain grinds to a halt because the Dark Lord is doing school pickups. Voldemort without love had no weakness and almost won. Voldemort with love has a daughter in Hogwarts and can't focus on anything else. So yeah, the war ends in months. Ron and Lavender. Everyone remembers this one. It actually happened. 6th year Ron and Lavender were a real couple for about 6 months. The Won-Won era. It ended when Ron got poisoned and whispered Hermione's name from his hospital bed, which is a pretty definitive breakup. But what if Won-Won just kept going? The problem is simple. Lavender adores Ron exactly as he is. Sounds sweet, but works terribly. She never tells him he's being thick, which if you've read the book, someone needs to do roughly every 40 pages. Hermione made Ron better because she expected more. Lavender makes Ron comfortable, and comfortable Ron is the Ron who panicked under pressure, almost failed every exam, and never would have walked back into that frozen forest with the Deluminator. The Horcrux hunt either loses him or never gets him in the first place, because Lavender would grab his sleeve and say, "Won-Won, it's dangerous." And honestly, he'd listen. Meanwhile, Hermione ends up with Krum. The man asked twice. He was nothing if not persistent, and becomes the youngest minister for magic operating from Bulgaria's most famous living room. Ron runs the joke shop with George. Molly smiles at Lavender over Christmas dinner while silently mourning the daughter-in-law she almost had. Ron was always capable of being great. He just needed someone who refused to let him be Won-Won forever. Harry and Hermione. Harry and Hermione, the couple that half the fandom was ready to bet money on. The movies practically advertised it. The tent dance scene in Deathly Hallows had zero business being that romantic, and Warner Brothers knew exactly what they were doing. So, what if they actually got together? Ron leaves during the Horcrux hunt either way. The locket feeds on jealousy, and if Harry and Hermione are actually a couple, that locket barely needs to try. Except in canon, Ron comes back because of the Deluminator, destroys the locket and pulls the sword of Gryffindor out of a frozen lake. In this timeline, Ron Ron leaves and stays gone, because there's nothing ambiguous about the situation anymore. He's just the third wheel who got confirmed. Most fans don't realize how much of the endgame depends on Ron specifically. The trio loses the Deluminator, the sword moment, and the one person who knew how to get into the Chamber of Secrets to grab basilisk fangs for destroying Horcruxes. Harry and Hermione are smart, but Hermione overthinks and Harry rushes in. Ron was the weird middle ground that kept them functional. Without him, they're a couple that argues about strategy until Voldemort finds them. And then there's the Weasley problem. Harry loses his surrogate family. Ginny is standing somewhere being awkward, and Christmas at the Burrow gets real quiet. Two best friends gained a relationship and lost the one person who made them a team, Narcissa and Snape. Narcissa Black had every rich pureblood in Slytherin lining up, and she picked Lucius Malfoy, the blonde, the money, the manner. But what if she'd picked the half-blood genius sitting 3 rows behind him who was quietly becoming the most dangerous wizard in school? Narcissa and Snape marry, and their son Draco Snape grows up with black family gold and a father who can outduel anyone in the room. He's sharp, he's got the attitude, but Snape, who actually got the girl he loved, turned into a completely different man, and that man raised a Gryffindor. Draco lands in Harry's dormitory. They argue about Quidditch at breakfast, and by 3rd year they're the kind of friends that Scorpius and Albus would have been a generation later. Now Lucius marries someone else, has a son, and when Voldemort returns, that son gets the punishment job: kill Dumbledore. In canon, Snape swore the unbreakable vow to protect Draco Malfoy, shadowed him all year, and ultimately killed Dumbledore on that tower so the kid wouldn't have to. In this timeline, Snape married Narcissa and owes Lucius absolutely nothing, so the vow never gets made, and Lucius's kid walks up to that tower alone with a shaking wand, and no one coming to save him. He fails, and Voldemort doesn't forgive failure. The boy doesn't survive the summer, and Dumbledore walks into 7th year still breathing, still planning, and still being the only wizard Voldemort ever feared. And then there's Narcissa's sister. Bellatrix has never been good at keeping quiet. She talks about the Dark Lord the way other people talk about their kids. Over family dinners, Narcissa hears about a cup locked in Bellatrix's Gringotts vault, about objects the Dark Lord treats as more precious than any follower's life. Narcissa passes everything to Snape. Snape passes it to Dumbledore. And suddenly the Order has Horcrux locations handed to them across a dinner table instead of 3 teenagers guessing their way through a forest. Dumbledore alive and armed with a full list of Horcruxes. Narcissa feeding intel from her sister's living room, and the woman who lied to Voldemort's face once in canon now doing it every single week. The war wraps up before Harry's 7th year even starts. Hermione and Fred Weasley. Everyone knows opposites attract, and there's no bigger opposite at Hogwarts than Hermione Granger, the girl who color codes her homework, and Fred Weasley, the guy who once turned a school corridor into a swamp and flew away on a broomstick. They start spending time together at the Burrow, Hermione laughing at things she'd normally report to a prefect, Fred actually listening to someone for the first time in his life, and the whole family sees it happening before Ron does. When Ron figures it out, something breaks. This is the kid who spent 6 years being the least special Weasley. No money, no fame, no talent that anyone notices. Harry gets the glory, Hermione gets the grades, and now his own brother gets the girl. Voldemort would kill for a Weasley, a pure blood from Dumbledore's most loyal family. Angry, humiliated, knowing every Order safe house, every member, every plan. Ron doesn't show up at Malfoy Manor in a mask. He shows up broken, looking for someone who'll tell him he matters. The Death Eaters give him that. The Order loses its safe houses within a week. The Horcrux hunt collapses because Ron knows Harry is in the forest, and the Weasleys have to fight a war knowing their youngest son is on the other side of it. Hermione chose the fun brother, and the other one burned the world down over it. Turns out heartbreak and dark magic need the same thing to work. Someone who feels like they have nothing left. Hagrid and Maxime. Everyone talks about Hagrid's love for dangerous creatures, but somehow forgets he also fell for the only woman in Europe who could look him in the eye without a stepladder. Madame Maxime, headmistress of Beauxbatons, half giant, and the one person who made Hagrid put on a horrible hairy suit and try to comb his beard. In canon, they had a thing during the Triwizard Tournament, went on a mission to recruit giants for Dumbledore together, and then quietly fizzled out. So, what if it didn't fizzle out? The giant mission is where everything changes. In canon, Hagrid goes to the Giants practically alone. Maxime splits off halfway through after they start arguing, and the whole thing is a disaster. The Giants side with Voldemort, and at the Battle of Hogwarts, they're smashing through the castle walls fighting for the Death Eaters. Now, imagine Hagrid and Maxime show up together, united, a power couple who are living proof that half-giants can lead schools and earn the trust of wizards. The pitch to the Giants goes from one weird gamekeeper mumbling about Dumbledore to a diplomatic mission. Maxime is a headmistress. The woman runs an entire school. She knows how to handle a room, even if the room is full of 20-foot-tall giants with anger issues. The Giants join Dumbledore. The Battle of Hogwarts gets 20-foot reinforcements on the right side of the wall. The Death Eaters lose their biggest weapon, and Voldemort's army suddenly looks a lot smaller, all because Hagrid finally learned to comb his beard. Fleur and Ron. Remember when Ron tried to ask Fleur to the Yule Ball and instead of actual words, something between a scream and a hiccup came out of his mouth? Fleur's Vela blood hit Ron so hard he forgot how sentences work, and the whole school watched it happen in real time. In canon, Fleur married his older brother, Bill, which means Ron had to sit through every family dinner watching his crush call his brother my love in a French accent. So, what if Ron's hiccup somehow worked? The Horcrux hunt collapses immediately. Ron, with a Vela wife at home, doesn't volunteer for months of camping in frozen forests with his two best friends. Hermione and Harry go alone, which we already covered. That duo overthinks everything and saves nothing, but the real damage is Shell Cottage. In canon, that house was safe because Bill Weasley is a professional curse breaker from Gringotts. He wrapped that cottage in protective charms strong enough to hide from Voldemort himself. Ron and Fleur would probably still be living in the burrow with Molly, because Ron is Ron, and a house costs money. When Dobby grabs the trio and apparates away from Malfoy Manor, there's no secret cottage by the sea with bank-level security. There's the burrow, which Death Eaters have been watching since September. So Fleur picked the wrong Weasley, and Voldemort gets to keep his last Horcrux forever. Neville and Luna. Remember that moment in Deathly Hallows Part 2 where Neville stops mid-battle to say he's mad about Luna? The books never wrote that, not once. The author herself admitted she felt a pull between them, but decided it was too neat. So Neville married Hannah Abbott and Luna married Newt Scamander's grandson. The fandom has never recovered. So, what if the movies got it right? The whole 7th year changes. Neville is leading the DA from the Room of Requirement, taking beatings from the Carrows, turning into someone Hogwarts barely recognizes. Then Death Eaters grab Luna and lock her in the Malfoy Manor basement, and the quiet herbology kid who used to lose his toad every other week does exactly what love tells him to do. Something incredibly stupid. He grabs a handful of DA members, no real plan, no backup, and goes after her. The Malfoys are expecting Harry Potter, so a group of teenagers sneaking through the garden barely counts as a Tuesday for their security. Neville gets caught in about 15 minutes. Now both of them are locked in that basement. The DA has lost its leader, and Hogwarts has nobody holding the resistance together. The Carrows take the Room of Requirement back. Dumbledore's army scatters, and when the Battle of Hogwarts finally comes, there's no one standing in front of Voldemort pulling a sword out of the hat. Nagini lives and the last Horcrux survives. So yeah, Voldemort wins. Turns out the bravest thing Neville ever did in canon was not being in love during a war. Snape and Lily. Snape and Lily, the love story that the actual books are secretly built on. Remove Snape's love for Lily and 7 books collapse like a Jenga tower missing every other block. So what if she loved him back? 5th year by the lake. The moment that ended everything in canon just doesn't happen. Friendship turns into something more, and Lily Evans becomes Lily Snape, a wedding that would make James Potter swallow his own broomstick. They have a son, Harry Snape, which already sounds like a potions accident. But the prophecy doesn't care about last names. Voldemort kicks down the door the same way he always does. Lily dies shielding her son, Snape dies beside her, and baby Harry survives with a scar and absolutely no one left. James is alive but wants nothing to do with Lily's kid by his worst enemy, so Narcissa Malfoy takes him in. Severus was practically family to the Malfoys, and Harry grows up at the manor, sleeping down the hall from Draco, wearing hand-me-down robes that actually fit for once. The Sorting Hat drops him into Slytherin before he even sits down. Voldemort spots a Snape raised by Malfoys with rage and zero guidance, and recruitment basically handles itself. love. The wizarding world survived because Severus Snape got his heart broken. Give him the girl and Voldemort wins. Worst love story ever told, for everyone except Snape. Harry and Luna. Everyone at Hogwarts called Luna crazy. She believed in invisible creatures that only she could see. Luna was also the only person who could comfort Harry after Sirius died. In canon, Harry married Ginny. But what if he fell for the girl everyone underestimated? The first thing that changes is who Harry trusts. Luna doesn't compete with Ron and Hermione. She just exists slightly to the left of everyone, noticing things nobody else bothers to look at. And the creature she notices first is Dobby. Luna is the only student at Hogwarts who talks to house elves like they're people, asks their names, sits on the kitchen floor eating pudding with them at midnight. Dobby adores her immediately, and suddenly Harry has a girlfriend with a direct line to the most loyal, magically gifted spy network in Britain. House elves who can apparate through any ward, enter any building, and are invisible to every Death Eater because purebloods don't look down. When the war gets serious, Harry doesn't camp in a frozen forest with a broken radio. Luna sends Dobby into Malfoy Manor because Dobby already knows the layout, the schedules, the secret rooms. Dobby brings back information about the cup in Bellatrix's vault at Gringotts. Dobby brings back the Sword of Gryffindor from wherever Snape hid it. And Dobby brings back Ollivander and the other prisoners weeks earlier than canon, because Luna asked him to check on anyone who looks sad down there. Ron and Hermione are still around, still fighting, but the war's engine runs on Luna's weird friendships and Dobby's terrifying loyalty. The elf who died saving Harry in canon becomes the reason Harry wins months earlier in this one. Sirius and Marlene McKinnon. Marlene McKinnon barely gets a mention in the books, a name on the list, a photo on the Old Order, a family wiped out by Death Eaters before the war even ended. Most fans scroll right past her, but if Sirius Black loved this woman, the entire Harry Potter story unravels from page 1. The night Death Eaters show up to kill the McKinnon, Sirius is there. He's one of the best duelists the Order has, and with Marlene fighting beside him, they survive. Barely, bloody, but alive. Hours later, the Potters die. Sirius wants to hunt Peter Pettigrew down and tear him apart with his bare hands. And the old Sirius would have done exactly that, sprinted off alone, no plan, straight into Peter's trap. But Marlene grabs him and says the one thing nobody said in canon: go to Dumbledore first. So Dumbledore gets the real story. Peter is the traitor. The Aurors find him before he can fake his own death. And Peter Pettigrew goes to Azkaban instead of Sirius. Sirius walks free, picks up baby Harry from the wreckage and raises him with Marlene in a house full of magic, motorcycle parts, and someone who actually loves him. Harry Potter arrives at Hogwarts with no scar trauma, no cupboard under the stairs, no Dursleys. He's confident, loved, trained by a godfather who taught him to duel before he could ride a broom. Meanwhile, Peter is rotting in Azkaban, which means when Voldemort needs a servant for the resurrection ritual in the graveyard, there's nobody coming. The Dark Lord stays a ghost, wandering Albanian forests forever, waiting for a follower who's never getting out of prison. The whole series, 7 books, 2 wars, hundreds of deaths, doesn't happen because one woman told Sirius Black to calm down for 5 minutes. So yeah, love could have changed everything, it just didn't. But the story kept going. All 21 new wizards and witches you missed after the Deathly Hallows explained in detail. That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before the fandom writes another ending.